I'm from Gaines County, real sandy ground. There's a sign coming into town says it's #1 producer of cotton in Texas, #1 producer of oil, peanuts, and the #1 people. Some may dispute us on all 4 points, but that's where I was raised. Dr. Zach asked us a challenging question: how do you know what you don't know? And Mr. Evans asked me yesterday where this whole thing kind of started, and I really couldn't pinpoint an accurate time I could say, well, right here is where I figured, something had to change. It was a process. But the more I thought into it, I think it started when I was a kid. I grew up on a farm. My dad worked for a farmer between Seminole and La Mesa, and my mother grew a garden every year. And out that way, good red dirt, beautiful garden year after year. When we moved off onto Dad's farm, when Dad was able to go out on his own, we moved onto the farm there, tighter dirt, lots of caliche, shallow rock, and we'd had to start from scratch on the garden. And Mom pestered Dad until he brought her a load of cotton burrs, and we slung them out on that garden with pitchforks until they were about 6 inches deep. And then we learned real quick the carbon to nitrogen ratio. Nothing would grow. All the nitrogen was tied up trying to break down all the plant material we threw out there. And after a couple of years, every spring we'd go and dig up the garden beds and get ready to plant. We were finding earthworms. The soil was real mellow. It was warm, mellow, soft. It was just real pleasant. And that was on the corner of the fields, and we'd go into the fields, and it'd be hard, be difficult to work with. And there's just such a difference. And I guess that's as close as I can pinpoint it. Now let's see if I can figure this thing out. So it's not quite the promised land. One of the first men through the country reported it has no soil, no water, no game. It might be used as a penal colony, which makes a lot of sense because not a lot of folks move away from Seminole. Once you're there, you're there. I think I skipped one, but this is my family, my wife Susie, our 3 children, Hadassah, Meredith, Micah. And farming is basically all I've ever wanted to do. I was homeschooled all my life, all through school, and Dad started farming in '97. He bought a quarter a section, and nobody wanted that quarter. That's why it sold cheap. They called it the all rock, no water farm, and they weren't far from the truth, but it was a start. And with a lot of work and diligence and lots of blessings, he's grown it into an operation that's supported us as a family. And in 2006, he went full-time. He was able to quit his job and farm full-time. And once we lived on the farm, Mom had a real hard time keeping me inside doing school. I'd much rather be outside and running tractor and so on and so forth. We got married in 2015, stayed on the farm, worked for Dad. And then in 2017, my cousin Bradley, he was restructuring his farming operation, and he was turning back half a section of irrigated ground and a quarter of dry land. And he gave me a call and asked me if I'd like an opportunity to pick it up. So went and talked to the landowner, and I don't know what compelled him, but he gave this pimply-faced 25-year-old kid a shot at it. And that's where our start was. The next year, we picked up a little bit more ground, and it slowly grew from there. In 2019, I pretty much moved off of Dad's farm completely. We were farming for ourselves full time, and so we still harvest together. Get to run harvest crews, and it's always a pleasure being able to work with family. They put up well with me. Gaines County, this is the best indicator I could find of the yields. Our yields are going down. There's years that are a little better than others, but as you can tell, our dryland yield for 2001, our dryland yields the T yield for Gaines County was nearly 250 pounds to the acre on dryland. Now we're down to 150, 120. It's a disturbing trend. Irrigated, same way. 2001 and prior, irrigated tea yield was 633 pounds. Last year it was 510. You know, the water has declined, irrigation has declined immensely in our area, but with all the new technologies and all the new seeds and everything that, you know, modern agronomy has to offer us, we're still going in the wrong direction. We're still backing up. But none of our inputs are. Dad bought a 97, in 2007, Dad bought an 8300 tractor. It was a 97 tractor with a little under 6,000 hours. He paid $60,000 for it. What would a 10-year-old tractor with under 6,000 hours bring now? It'd be at least triple the price. Cotton harvesters, they're, you know, pushing $1 million for a single machine now. Our cotton hasn't gone up. Our water's gone down. Inputs have gone up. Cotton seeds, you know, pushing $500 a sack. Now, if you really want to raise my blood pressure, let's talk about cotton seed quality. But I won't delve too hard into that, or I'll blow up. But it's a worrying trend. It's going the wrong direction, and there seems to be no stopping it. Every year we downsize pumps, drill more wells, but I don't think we can drill our way out of this problem. The last 2 wells I drilled, one pumped 20 gallons a minute. The second well pumped 7 gallons a minute. Sad thing is I tied those in because it would help. So that's throwing your money down a hole. So got to thinking, you know, by drilling wells every year, every couple of years, you keep punching holes, we won't be able to outrun this problem. All we're doing is spending more money, delaying the inevitable, and not improving anything in the meantime. You know, Einstein says the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting the same result. But back to 17, my first year was a cream puff. We had a circle of wheat. We cut and baled it for hay. A lot of ranch land back south of us, Andrews County, Ector County. We have a good market for feed. We always bale it up in round bales. It's easier to handle, easier to store. But it was a wet spring, a lot of feed. Didn't do much profit-wise. But the Virginia peanuts made nearly 6,000 pounds an acre. I thought I rung the bell. Irrigated cotton made 1,200 pounds. Dryland made 750. Farming ain't so hard, y'all. I don't know why everybody was always complaining at the gin. They should just come to me. I had all the answers. It worked out okay. Then in 18, we had a bit of a mixed bag. We lost the dryland early. Peanuts and irrigated cotton yields were okay. We held our own. We were beating APH. We were holding our own. But it was a good year for hay. And swathed and baled our wheat. Made good money on that. Then we turned around and put in a summer crop. And this is kind of where it all started. I figured, well, if I can get one winter hay crop off of it, maybe I can get lucky and pull a summer crop off of it as well. So I went to the local nutrient. I was going to see if they had some more hay grazer seed, and they didn't. But they had something called millet. And he said, just go ahead and throw that out there. It'll be all right. It's better than hay grazer. And I said, well, it sounds like you're trying to clean the barn out of the last of the stuff, and you're going to tell me what I want to hear to where I'll sow it. So I went ahead and did. I sowed it. Most of my stuff was in hay grazer. Once we ran out of seed, we switched to millet and kept going. Dad, I think that was our first multi-species. He went and planted some iron and clay peas on 40-inch centers with his planter. Better spacing, better singulation, run on top of the row, and ran his drill set up for minimum till down the middles, sowing hay grazer. And it looked really good, and it made some really good feed. Now, I'm kind of hesitant to call it a cover crop if we harvested it. And I've kind of changed my approach from the hay side of things, but it worked really well the first year, and it was really encouraging, and that's why we kind of kept with it. One thing that we did notice that year on the millet was while it was a lot shorter, it made the same, if not more, tonnage than the hay grazer. And in the years to come in that same field, we noticed another thing that we hadn't noticed initially, but I'd started that field, and it was the backside of it still had some hay grazer seed in it, so we emptied out the drill and switched to millet. Same field, same conditions, same herbicide applications, but up to 3 years later, I would have less weed pressure where we had the millet than where we had the hay grazer. Now, I don't know why, maybe somebody a lot smarter than me can explain it, but that was just, year after year after year, it was evident to the row where the hay grazer had stopped and the millet had started. So it was, again, cotton and peanuts, they held their own. Hay did well. I was still pretty confident and cocky in what we were doing. The peanuts did okay. They had the priority on water. Cotton sure felt it. We still beat APH that year, but not by a whole lot. And as you can tell there, I was running sweeps. That's a hard habit to kill when you have weeds that just won't die off of technology. It's just so tempting just to run some 30-inch iron through a 40-inch middle and clean it up. Oh, wrong direction. And then we went to 19. That was some cotton up in the millet stubble. I went and planted no-till. I could not afford row cleaners, so I tried planting without them. And without too much residue on the ground, it worked great. It actually worked really well. Cotton came up with no trouble. And this was my first year of no-tilling peanuts. In 18, I still had 60 acres on that farm. And with the yields dropping, and I could tell the water was starting to decrease in quantity. So we went ahead and cut our acreage back from 30 acres of peanuts from 60 acres down to 30. So we cut our peanut acres in half and then put the other 90 acres on that 120 circle into cotton. Had some seed quality issues that year, had to replant. Planted, seeds started rotting in the ground. They came out and said, oh, it's because it's no-till. Well, that was kind of discouraging. So I went ahead and got some more seed ordered, went and replanted it. When I was going to pull into the field, there was a lot of peanuts that I thought were dead. They were starting to come back. So we went ahead and just scooted the planter over about 6 to 8 inches to where the press wheels would run right next to the existing row, and we just twin rowed them. And it turned out really well. Beardless wheat, had a wet spring, did really, really well. We cut it kind of low, as you can tell there in the picture, but I think we made like 5 round bales to the acre, so about 2.5 tons of dry hay. And it gave us a cover to keep it from blowing. It wouldn't blow in the winter, and in the spring and in the summer, it would. We had cover there. There was nothing living, but at least it wasn't blowing. And then I met Martin Hockley through Mark Walker McNear, some other really good growers, Patrick Middlebrook, and Chris Verrett, and a bunch of good guys that, really forward thinking. And I got the crazy idea, well, I'm going to try to interseed into cotton. Most of the guys that were doing it on 60-inch rows where they could run something to drag down the middles, try to incorporate the seed a little bit, or they were throwing it into 30-inch cotton that was completely canopied and had shade. So I wasn't sure how it was going to work on 40-inch cotton. As you can tell, I've got quite a bit of, open space in the middles. We've got sunlight hitting the ground. But we threw it out in September, and then about a month later, you could tell it was really off to a good start. You can see that strip there, right? That's where the sun always hit. This would be the south side of the plant, or the north. This would be the south side, north side, so you can see as the sun comes down, it would dry out. I had sowed a bunch of spelt, and it was unhulled. It's like an oat. The seed is in a husk, and it was the biggest pain in the butt to try to get it to flow through a box drill. And after about 130 acres of getting out every round and cleaning out 2 or 3 units, I gave up. I hadn't returned one of the fertilizer spreaders yet, so we went and threw it in there. We ran it till we ran out of seed. And so went a little heavy, but we were off to a good start. It looked really well. And this is my all-time high. I'll never make peanuts like this again. But the no-till yielded, 6,858 pounds. Conventional tillage made 5,300 pounds. And that's where, the idea really took root. This can work. There was a lot of guys that said, oh, you can no-till cotton, you can minimum-till cotton, but you can't do peanuts. You're going to have a lot of pod rot. You can't dig them when they're flat planted. For every question, there was 12 excuses. And I'm not saying that I had it all figured out. I got real lucky, but it turned out really, really well. And in my mind, it concreted the opinion where this works, I've got to stick to it. And this, I don't know if you can play this video or not, but this is some of the spelt in the spring of 20 that we had interseeded into some covers, into the cotton there. And if it won't play, that's fine. What I was going to show you is, you can see, the dreadlocks on our fine sand, and that is some really fine sand, but there's actually the dirt sticking together. It's holding a shape, which that in and of itself was really encouraging. But you see this peanut's been in the ground for about 18 months, and it's starting to break down. And these little white edges there on the bottom side, there's little mites in there. You could see them with the naked eye, crawling around there, just busting stuff up, chewing it up. And you see that little speck there about in the center of the top half. That was a root. That spelt plant had found that peanut. You have all this microbial activity breaking it down, and that plant is just feeding right off of it. And that was like Christmas. I couldn't believe it. Life is starting to come back. I can see things I don't need a microscope. I can see it with the bare eyes. And it's only been 2 years since we've gone down this path. Oh, there it is. I don't know if you can see them little guys in there. They're just moving around, living their best life. And it just tickled me pink. You can see the root up there. It's tapped in directly into it. So on the irrigated, felt pretty confident. I've got this figured out. We can rotate peanuts, cotton. We've got a legume. We've got a broadleaf. We can interseed our covers, and we can water, and we're on the path to success. But like all good things, you sometimes you wake up and you get a reality check. But these are some more of the covers. We had some black oats. We had some spelt and some beardless wheat. You can just see the difference in the root mass. I cheated. I didn't dig them up. Pivot broke down, sat in the same spot for about 12 hours. And I was changing the gearbox and just grabbed each plant and just pulled it up. And that's what they took with. And one thing that really struck me when visiting with Martin is, roots, how critical roots are to bringing this back. If you have something laying on top of the ground, it's called residue. But if you can break it down and put it in the ground, well, then it's organic matter. So how do we speed up that process? We'd make compost piles in Mom's garden, and we'd have to pile the wheat, pile some, clippings and goat droppings, and chicken litter, and all that good stuff. We'd have to throw it all into piles. You have to keep it moist. You have to keep it wet. Just perfect conditions. Same temperature. You can't have it too hot. You can't have it too cold. But you have to have moisture in order for that to start breaking down. Well, we don't have a whole lot of warm, cloudy, wet days to help break down that residue when it's on the surface. So why not try to grow most of our residue where it is warm, where there's not the massive temperature swings, where that can break down quicker, and that's in underground. Those roots will break down a lot quicker than the straw will above ground. So the emphasis became roots. Let's grow more roots, more infiltration, deeper penetration, and it'll break down quicker. It'll break down faster, and we won't end up with the problem of too much residue at the surface. So that became the next rabbit hole we fell into, was chasing roots. This was that same spelt that we interseeded, and this was some spelt and oats. Oats did really, really well. They made 3 dry tons to the acre, and the spelt did 2.5. Both of these were planted or sown at 18 pounds to the acre, just really, really low rates. If one thing I found out real quick was, you get gung-ho, you're going to throw 12, 15 species out there and all these pounds. I know somebody mentioned they had, thrown a 12-way blend out, and they were disappointed in the results. And I think it's a direct correlation between price and expectation. If you're going to throw $60 an acre worth of seed out there, you want to see $600 an acre worth of improvements. And if we look into our native, or I guess as close to native, if I walked across the road and went and looked at some CRP or pasture ground, there's not 120 plants in a square foot. There's not a seed per inch. It's widely spaced. It's lower population. It's got massive root systems, more drought tolerance. So that's what I was trying to emulate with my covers is, I hadn't gone multi-species at this point, but to lower my seeding rates to encourage the root growth. I don't need residue up top. I do need some just to keep the wind off of it, but the winner in the long term is organic matter below ground. So dropped the seeding rates really low, scary low. It looked like it was going to blow all winter, but it held, and it worked out all right. Oh boy, 2020. At this point, I was getting really cocky. I was the smartest man to walk in Gaines County, maybe even West Texas. I wanted to go wide row so badly. I'd seen some of Walker's 60-inch, some of Patrick's 90-inch cotton, and I wanted to go wide row so bad, but I could not quite bring the landowner on board with going that wide. And the banker sure didn't, because, you go on 80s, you drop your insurance guarantee by half. And so it was, 60s was a compromise. Well, at this point, we were farming about 1,000 acres. A lot of it was kind of spread out, about 40, 50 miles between the 2 furthest points, and I was doing everything by myself. I was a one-man show. So that summer, or that spring, I go and tear my planter apart, move everything from 40s to 60s. And long story short, I was a day late and $1 short. But we did get the crops in. I planted my peanuts on 30s, so I had to plant it twice. First, plant one set of rows, shift over 30 inches, plant the next set of rows. And I did all my cotton on 60s. This was 60-inch Pima cotton. This was the full-blooded, non-hybrid version. It was long season, long season. And I'm not sure if y'all remember 20, how it ended up, but it wasn't pleasant. You don't want to see your cotton froze out like that. And if you've ever grown peanuts, you really don't want to see snow on peanuts. Planters does not like that. You get freeze damage on them, they'll drop to loan price. These were organic peanuts. They were contracted at, I think, $1,100 a ton. If they got freeze damage, they were worth $300 a ton. So, like I was saying, I was a day late, $1 short putting them in. So I got caught with my pants down towards the end of the year. We got the early freeze, and then it wouldn't quit freezing. We needed at least 4 days with no frost to get these peanuts dug out. to where they dry down far enough before we could combine them, and we just wouldn't get it. And they sat in the ground about 2 weeks longer than they should have. But we eventually got them out, and by leaving them in the ground, we averted the freeze damage. It didn't freeze hard enough to freeze them underground. But it was a lesson hard learned that sometimes trying to be perfect is the enemy of good. I bit off more than I could chew, and it sure bit me in the butt. I was also late planting the Pima, so it did not finish in time, and I was 2 days past the insurance deadline. It was non-insured, and that's where I pushed everything. So that was rough, but we survived. So we again interseeded covers. Some of that spelt that we had left over, we dumped it back in the spreader, slung it out. This was 60-inch upland cotton. As you can tell, it also froze out. It was wide enough to where we could run a Lilliston rolling cultivator through there, and we just turned the angles completely straight and just kind of shifted the soil a little bit and worked the seed in. I think that was about 30 pounds an acre that we put out there. And in that same field, it filled in nicely. The one thing about the spelt is it'll really tiller. It is amazing how much ground that one plant will cover. And we ended up shredding that, and it broke my heart. I really wanted to turn cattle out in there. But I learned my lesson not to, overstep my abilities, and I was taxed hard enough trying to keep the farm going without adding livestock. So we ended up just mowing it down, and we ended up swathing and baling that, and I'm actually feeding it right now to some of our cows. It translates better in Low German. I'm a Mennonite, and in Low German it's "Als ich einmal Socke in Sonnenschein." It ain't all sugar sweet and sunshine. And this field here lays in a draw, and it gets wind erosion and water erosion. It'd been washed out really bad over the years. It blown up. It's a mess, and it's one extreme to the other. You can tell, how sandy it is here in the low areas, but the sand's all washed off the slope, so we've got cleachy, we've got no topsoil there. It's just cleachy. So that summer, we caught a couple of decent rains, and figured, what, this is as good a time as any. I was all in on the no-till deal. I told myself I'm going to tandem it. We're going to work it up real good. I'm going to level it off. We're going to catch a rain in, July, August, and I'll sow some hay grazer in it, keep it from blowing. And if we don't, we always catch those September rains that we use to put in wheat. Well, I worked it till it was fine as dust. Spent weeks out there on a land plane leveling it off, and it never rained. As you can tell, we had the circle. We got it established under irrigation, but we had about 40 to 50 acres on the corner there laying in the draw that it blew all winter. I had to sow some of it 4 times before we got a cover on it, and it is rough as all get out now, but I don't dare try to level it again. I still remember that lesson. That would hurt. Excuse me. In 2021, we picked up a new farm in Terry County. It's between Wellman and Brownfield. And dirt's a little tighter there than what I was used to in the sand. Water infiltration was not an issue where I was farming. But as you can see here, that was about a 1/4-inch rain about 3 hours before I got there. On the ground that I had been farming in Gaines County, that 1/4-inch, you wouldn't see it in 3 minutes. That sand just pulls it right down to the bottom. But here I drove up, and I thought, I got a great big old rain. There's water in the rows. And I went, grabbed me a shovel, and I didn't even need it. I dug about 1/2 inch of wet dirt, and it was dry underneath. So that was a new challenge. How do we approach this? This is a whole nother animal. And this is not this hasn't been neglected. This has been a really intensively farmed cotton field, but they never let it blow. It was always well taken care of. So it was a new challenge. So we were starting with a clean slate, and we didn't know where to go from there. This is a farm that we bought in 2018, end of 2018 into 2019. We bought 180 acres north of Wellman, and it was certified organic when we bought it. And I figured, you know, this may work. I didn't like the tillage aspect of it, but I figured maybe I can work in some covers and make this work. But who knew that when you buy land, you can't always completely 100% trust the buyer or trust the seller when he says how much water it has? Well, that stung. I took his estimate. It sounded kind of high. He said it had 400 gallons there. And I thought, man, if that's true, this is a home run. That's more water than I've ever had to deal with. You know, I had big plans. But I cautioned myself. I said, well, what if it only has half that? What if it only has 200 gallons on 180 acres? Well, I thought I could make it work. Well, after drilling 2 wells, I can proudly say I've got 100 gallons a minute on that farm. So it was excuse me, a slight exaggeration on his account, but you know, it has forced us to try to make this work. It's pushed me in a direction that I was hoping that we wouldn't have to acknowledge. And what are we going to do when the water runs out? And it's an uncomfortable idea, but I'm on the very bottom end of the Ogallala Aquifer. It ends in Andrews County, which is one county south of me, one county, you know, downstream. So if you imagine a glass of water, this would be North Dakota down here, you know, their straw's got a lot of water above it. Mine's about here somewhere, you know, up at the cup. I'm pumping a lot of air. So, you know, it was a blessing in disguise because it has forced me to get ahead of the curve. This was a reality check, you know. How do we approach this? How do we go forward from here? Like I said, this was organic, so we had deep broke it. I was trying to limit tillage passes. So what would normally happen, we would pack the whole farm, run a land plane across it, level it back off, water it, throw up the beds again. So we cut out the land plane and the lister. We just row packed it. Just packed on 40-inch centers, planted on top of the rows. And broke it. With organic, you want to break it as late as possible to turn over as many of the weeds as you can. And so we broke it late and it dried everything out. I had no moisture left to plant into. I had about 8 inches of dry dirt on top of the beds. And with the water I had, it was going to take me a month to put down 1 inch of water on that 120 acres. Well, in a month's time, wherever I started the pivot, it would be dried right back down again. So I went to the hardware store, and they had a roll of twine on the discount deal. I had 1,000 feet of twine. So at this point, I had an employee. We bought it, and we spent a couple hours that evening stringing this twine between the towers, grabbed a bag of zip ties, and then we could position the hoses right on top of the row. We flipped our caps on the LDNs to bubblers. Now all of a sudden, we're just streaming right on top of the bed. So we're only trying to meet the moisture on 20 inches versus 80. I could whip that pivot around in a week, put down the same amount of water where I really needed it, and it allowed me to get the crop in. It's a rough concept, but it worked. Well, after breaking that organic stuff, it really made me think how much money I was spending into it. On the tillage side, these are numbers from A&M. I guess they're their surveys from our region. And these are the custom rates, what they would charge you if somebody came and did it. And I've done custom work at these rates, and I'll tell you what, if you have an employee in the tractor, by the time you pay his wages, you're not making any money. You're doing good just to pay expenses, and if you have any breakdowns or major repairs, you're going backwards. So our conventional model, we would generally spend about $76 an acre in land prep before we even put a seed in the ground. On my no-till side, you know, I'd sow maybe about 15 pounds of rye, 1.5 pounds of radish, This was back when Roundup was cheap. I could spray it for about $6 an acre. It cost me $40 an acre. And this was just to get the seed in the ground. I'm already saving $36. Now, if we actually do get a crop up, we have to take it to harvest, or we get to take it to harvest, we're going to have to add at least 3 trips with the sand fighter. Another $30, $40 an acre. So it started adding up, and with the low water on the organics, I always had just enough water to sprout weeds, but not enough water to get my crops to canopy to shade them out. So in 2021, it was my last year as organics. This was on the conventional side. These were some Spanish no-till peanuts, and this was some Delta pine. I believe this was 1822, and it was fun. Now we had a wet year again. And they say anybody can look smart when it rains. And I looked brilliant that year on most of it, except the picks. I should have picked a lot harder. We tried another cover. I had 30 acres that I just could not get to in time with a cotton planter, which turned out to be a blessing in disguise. We slung out some tough grass. The only way we could get it out, nobody had a grass seeder that I could use, so we went to the local fertilizer place and we had them blend the seed into about 100 pounds of AMS. And we slung it out end of June and got 1.5 inches, just a hard pounding rain. And it was enough to get it up and going. It looked a little thin at first. They told me I needed to put out at least 12 to 15 pounds to the acre, but 5 pounds was plenty. First cutting, I just cut it with a shredder, with a rotary mower. We had a lot of weeds that came up, and my sprayer was on the other farm, and the pig weeds got out of hand, so we just mowed it down really short by the end of July, knocked the weeds back, and then in September we actually went and took a cutting of hay off of it, and it did really well. Fall covers, you can put them in a lot easier when it rains. If you don't have to pull the irrigation off of your row crops in order to put in the covers, it makes life a lot easier. This was my first year of really trying to push the radish. And it was exciting to see. We had 18 pounds of triticale, 2 pounds of radish. And this farm, I couldn't plow even if I wanted to. We've got about 8 inches of topsoil before we hit cleachy. But these radish would go all the way to the bottom there, and as you can tell, they're rupturing the soil around there. This is some tighter dirt. It's on the edge of a draw, and I'd always have trouble with water standing. Water infiltration was a huge problem there. I could put down in 3/4 inch of water, and most of it would evaporate or run off. It was tight. We're one extreme or the other. One end of the farm will blow away with blow sand, and the other side, closer to the draw, we've got tight, dark dirt, just about 8 inches worth. So it's hard to find a balance, but this worked really well. We had a pivot. There's a common theme in my story is pivot broke down. But most of my pivots are 40 years old, if not older. But the pivot broke down, and it sat there for roughly about 14 hours. It sat there overnight. And I'm guessing on the far end of the pivot, it put down over 6 inches of water, and I had no standing water anywhere. I couldn't walk there just because it would pull my boots off. We were sinking down to the cleachy. It really, really made a difference. I couldn't believe it. And if anybody would have told me, I wouldn't have believed it either until I'm hopping down the field, missing the boot. Harvest 21, we pushed the peanuts really hard, and they did beat APH, but I was a little disappointed considering how much rain we had and the amount of water and inputs I put on them. So this was the last year I grew peanuts, and I don't know if I'll ever get a chance again. My water's dropped too far in the last year and a half. I don't think I'll ever be able to grow peanuts again. The cotton, though, cotton responded a lot better. I felt like with the rains we did get, the cotton was more profitable per inch. I made more money per inch of rainfall or irrigation with cotton than I did on peanuts. And And it was stepchild. The peanuts took the priority, and but the cotton still made. This is on Dad's farm. This is some 2 in, 2 out, and he just watered it up. He made 2 bales an acre to the row. That's a 120-inch gap there. So if you count it by the land acre, it made about a bale an acre. And this is the farm that they said had all rock, no water. Soil is not ideal. But the wide road really allowed the plants to compensate and to pick up the slack. I feel like it's a lot more resilient if you can put that massive root system underneath it. Most of our seeding rates on irrigated, last year I planted 18,000 seed an acre, 1 plant every 8 inches. And if I had more confidence in the seed quality, I would stretch it out even further. But due to the lack of seed quality, and it's across all brands, I don't dare go much thinner. But if I could get 1 plant every 14 inches, I think it would be ideal. And the first thing everybody always says is, well, you can't strip that. You're going to rip it out of the ground, and it's going to plug up your header. But we had a bit of an issue in 21. We set the planter wrong, and we planted a whole circle. We thought we were up in the seed rate, but we dropped it, and it was planted at like 13,000, 12,000, 13,000 pounds, 13,000 seed an acre. It still made 2 bales an acre under light irrigation, and I ran a stripper through it, and I never pulled a stalk out of my header. When you space it out, that root system, you know, it gets so much more robust. It sinks so much deeper into the soil. It's anchored. These are like trees, you know. Cotton is a perennial, and it acts like a tree, and you give it space, and it will grow like a tree. But this was my favorite part of the year, was when the landlady asked why it was smelling so bad behind her house. No, radish, they will raise a stink. We got a good hard freeze, end of January, knocked out all the radish. And I noticed another benefit with adding the radish to the cover crop, to the cereals, is the fact that I like the lower cereal rates a lot. You can see that the root systems are just so much larger, more robust. It's doing what I want it to do. But with the sandier areas, I run the risk of running too low a rate of cereal that it'll blow out in the fall. You know, if it starts smoking early in the fall, you can't ever tie it back down, and you're going to have an uphill battle the whole way. But by adding the radish, it grows so fast, and it's so robust. It'll cover the ground really, really quick, while the wheat or the triticale, whatever your cereal of choice is, it will keep it from blowing. But when your covers start going reproductive, or they start starting to boot, and they really need the moisture, well, by then usually the radishes have frozen off, and they've freed up whatever moisture's left. You know, the wheat can take it from there, or the trit, or whatever you've got. It works really well. This was a dryland farm. This was also in 21. Also on a new farm that I had picked up. We had planted cotton and started cracking, and then we had 3 days of 110, 111, and 109 degrees, just as this cotton was trying to come up. And it got cooked in the crook. You could go, and it was heartbreaking, because you could go and scratch, and you could see every single seed was right there, but it was toast. It was limp. It was dead as a hammer. Again, a common theme in my stories, my sprayer broke down, and it was sitting at the end of the field, and it had cast, a pretty good shadow where it sat. Well, in the shade, I had a perfect stand of cotton. It cooled the soil just enough to where this cotton could come up and survive the heat. So that stress, we've got to get that ground covered. I went and bought a thermometer gun, one of those infrared ones, and I should have put the picture up there, but we were showing the soil temperatures were 131 degrees right on top of the row. And I know I cannot survive that, and neither can cotton. So it gave us an opportunity. By losing that quarter section, we could put in some covers early. We'd got some decent rains throughout the summer. We just kept it clean. I think I sprayed it once in the summer. We had some weeds growing there, but I no longer consider them weeds. They are a native multi-species cover. Sounds a lot better if you put it that way. So we went ahead and we sowed 18 pounds of rye, which I think was a little thick, and a pound of radish. I should have dropped the rye to maybe about 12, 15 pounds and just done another pound of radish is what I should have done. We sowed this I think it was the last week in August. We had got a small rain, like 3/4 inch, and I figured, man, I may as well go and sow that, put it in wet dirt. Moisture's waning, but, it may or may not rain again. And it ended up being the right call because it did not rain on that farm until that following May. So this was taken April 4th, and it doesn't look impressive, just over the top. But we had the radish, they froze out at this point, and it wasn't blowing. One thing that we've run into, the biggest problem with having covers in our area on dry land is trying to pull down the sand ridges that your neighbor will blow onto you. Because you've got something there to stop the sand and they don't. So that's kind of a difficult, and they're good farmers for the most part, but sometimes you're a little late getting somewhere, and it only takes one good windstorm and all of a sudden you've got a 2-foot sand dune that wasn't there the week before. So now we've improved our program. I surrendered my organic certificate spring of 22, and this is that same field where we ran that hose along the rope between the towers so we could slide them bubblers right on top of the row, and that's how we filled our profile. We killed the covers and just cranked the pivot, let it spin around, planted the cotton, but I should have been pre-watering a lot harder. And they were saying, start with a full soil profile. Well, I learned that the hard way. You've got to have that profile filled, or the wide row will not save you. Wide row cannot compensate for drought if you're planting into a drought. If you've got a profile and you can put it into good moisture, you can get that root structure grown, you can get that root factory rolling, it can take just about anything you can throw at it. But it is not your answer if you don't have a soil profile. It will bite you in the butt. So we lost this field early, which we've got some really good covers on there now. Now we'll swing back to the tough grass that we seen earlier. We went ahead and planted into it. I actually had to go and spend the money and buy row cleaners. What had happened was when I shredded that first cotton, it left a layer of thatch. It looked like when I was a kid and I'd mow the grass and have to go empty the bag, or you kick that grass out. That's what it looked like on the farm. It was unreal. It was so hot. We hadn't had any rain since August of the previous year. I pre-watered as hard as I could on this one. And I'd put down a 3/4 inch about 3 days behind the planter. And when I went to plant, I still had wet dirt at the soil surface. And it blew my mind because I had never seen that before. Usually we'd have to bust down 1.5 inches, 2 inches to get back into wet dirt at that point. But this was at the surface. And this was the best 30 acres post-planting. Another thing that I've noticed since going more no-till has been my crusting has gone away. They've talked about the soil changing, the texture and the feel for it. And it's unreal how fast it happens. One of my concerns was with no-till is like, how am I going to scratch cotton? But I haven't had to since I have gone no-till. But we were off to a good start. This is end of July, and I've been watering. I never shut the water off on this farm. As you can tell, that it's not 4 bale acre cotton. We've got the teff grass in the background, and you can see my streaks. You know, we weren't getting good coverage on the pivot. And in the foreground, we've got millet for cover. And it was, I don't know what was going on there, but again, the crops behind the millet looked much better than behind the teff. Now, I don't know if anybody smarter than me can explain what's going on there. You don't have to be much brighter than to be smarter than me. But it was an interesting observation. I haven't given up on the teff grass yet. I think it warrants more work. I really like having another warm season grass to put out there. But it was just something that we saw. Another thing on this pivot is it really sunk in this year that I've got maybe 3 to 4 years of irrigation left on this farm. This farm has 340 acres under pivot. When I picked up the farm in 2018, that pivot was packaged at 400 gallons an acre, just a hair over a gallon per acre per minute. Spring of 22, we tipped that pivot down to 150 gallons. In July, I tied up half the nozzles to get water to the end. We're pumping maybe 100 gallons a minute if we're being generous. So I'm being pushed faster than I'm ready for it. But there's going to come a day where I'm going to have to park them pivots just entirely. 22 covers, there were some fields that we didn't even plant cotton. Not even for insurance. We just, by the time we did, I added it all up, you know, even if you planted it, worked it, whatever, failed it out on insurance by the time, and this is coming out of organic, so this was still conventional tillage, but coming out of organic, it was conventional tillage. By the time I had it all worked up and everything, even if cotton insurance at $1.03 or $1.13, it wasn't feasible, so we just left it out. It was going to rain again. It had to. So we just parked it, let it sit there. And then when they failed the cotton on the other side, this is, again, our organic farm, 100 gallons a minute on 180 acres. We went ahead, planted some peas, planted some hay grazer. Actually, no, this was millet and sun hemp down the middles. As you can tell, nature provided us with some biodiversity in the form of pigweeds and silver nightshade, and we're off to the races. So this was watered up with irrigation water. By the time we got to the other end, we had got a good rain. Solid pigweed. And the odd thing is, when this was broke out of CRP, the first 2 years I farmed it, you could not find a pigweed on that farm. They were non-existent. I did not have any hoeing bills the first 2 years. It was organic. I was able to cultivate it and hoe it myself. The last year it was organic. I had some hoeing bills that were nearly $500 an acre. That's not sustainable. Now, there's better organic farmers than me out there. I set the bar really low at that. But for me, it was not sustainable. But this was an interesting lesson. You know, nature, she's a modest lady. She does not like to be naked. She wants to be covered. And if you don't cover her, she will. And you may not like what she puts out there. You read in Genesis, the fall of man, you know, when they ate the apple, you know, all of a sudden they were aware of their nakedness, and they tried to cover themselves with fig leaves. And then they were cast out of the garden, and they were provided with robes. Well, part of the curse was weeds. So when they recognized their nakedness and they were covered, so was the earth. It was covered by weeds, just kind of an observation. So if I was going to hay this all of a sudden became a problem. I don't know many guys that like to feed pigweeds in bale for them. Where we had gotten the covers up beforehand, before the rain, they pretty much choked out everything but the Johnson grass. The peas were growing nicely in the rows, the millet, the sun hemp. We had some hay grazer that was left over in the box drill. It was a real pleasant place to go. Everything else is dry, dead, and blowing. And that 60-acre block, I could just spend all day there. It was, you know, the breeze coming off of it was so much cooler. It's one thing you don't realize is how hot the dirt is coming off of a conventionally tilled field. You got a breeze on a summer day off of some bare ground, and it'll cook you alive. But this is cool. It's a nice, comfortable breeze. Here we're putting down some nitrogen. All of a sudden we've got the sun hemp, you know. We've got nodules. You bust them open, they're just bright red inside. Same thing with the peas. But again, if it's on the ground, it's residue. How do we get it in the ground? How do we break this down into organic matter? These are my compost bioreactors. There's about 16 of them in there. I bought 15, and we had one sneak on the trailer. And I tell you what, I was real concerned for the next 3 days because I was losing my mind. One day I'd count 15. All right, that sounds about right. And then I'd count 16. Then I'd count them again. Oh, now there's 15. I thought I was going crazy, but turns out, yes, there are 16 out there. The livestock, I'm not a rancher. I'm not a cattleman by any means. They're a tool. Instead of another piece of tillage equipment, haying equipment, they're just another tool in the toolbox. You know, everybody says, oh, you can't make, this ain't cattle country. You can't make money off of cows. Well, I know people who do, but they're not, they are not going to become, and I hope they are. Lacey's making it work beautifully. I've got a lot to learn off of her operation. But for me, at this point, while I'm going into it, I'm just slowly stepping into the pool. They're a tool. They're a tool to harvest, to trample, to break it down, to bring some nutrients back. It's just like another piece of, instead of buying tillage equipment, I bought cows. We were trying to rotationally graze them. I bought a little crimper to drag behind the Ranger to lay down the hay grazer to where our fence wouldn't short out. It was cheap. Man, it worked really good. We can throw up a temporary fence about a quarter mile in about 5 minutes. You run across it once, lay it down, cut back, you know, make sure you got it really crimped, nothing will stand back up, and you zip across it, throw up that fence. It doesn't take, but it's a matter of minutes when the Ranger ain't broke down. This is that farm I had the picture of that we picked up, that dryland farm with the poor infiltration. We lost the cotton on it again this year. Well, I didn't have any dryland cotton. But I was all in now on the wide row. Talked to Tate and some other folks on 20-inch wheat and figured, you know, I've got nothing to lose. Wherever I've done wide row, I've seen good responses. But again, I was concerned about blowing early in the year because, oh man, that 20-inch wheat, especially at like 15, 18 pounds, it looks like there's nothing out there. It will not stop a 40-mile-an-hour wind, not by a long shot. I went to the co-op, or not to the co-op, but to the local fertilizer store, and I asked them, how low can your fertilizer spreader go? And they said, well, about 75 pounds. So I said, well, blend me up about 50 pounds an acre worth of AMS. I'll throw in the radish seed. And we went ahead, slung it out, and this was bare ground, so we just lightly dissed it under and then sowed across it. And so you can see we got a decent stand. That's about 2 pounds of radish, and they came up halfway decent. I wish I had a current picture in there, but the wheat's looking a lot better. Like I said, man, it looks thin. It looks really scary when it comes up, especially when you're used to you just seeing that green mat like hair on a dog. You have to change your perception on it. But the girls don't mind. They haven't been able to graze it down yet. We've been moving them in 30-acre blocks. I should be a lot more diligent in moving them at a faster rate. But they're liking it so far. They haven't broke out yet. Of course, there's nothing else for them to eat, so that may make a difference. I don't know how well it translates on the projector, but we did do a 10-inch strip to check for yield difference later. We're planning on taking this to harvest. You can see the 20-inch down here, the 10-inch down the middle. These are circle rows. In the back, we've got 20-inch again, and you can just see the color difference, how much more robust the 20-inch wheat is versus the 10. This has had no irrigation at this point. And these are our covers post-grazing. This is that sun humping stuff. They trampled it down. We had 15 cows, and they spent 90 days on these 60 acres. We've got the soil covered. There's a lot of manure out there. We've got enough residue to keep the ground cooler. You know, this is the first year. This was conventional tillage as of July. So this is a far improvement of what it was, but we've got a long way to go. We got some snow, you know, it piled up and stayed in there. It's been a journey, and it's easy to get excited. That was my problem. I'd get too excited. I'd see a new idea, and I'd just jump in with both feet. And man, that water was a lot deeper than I figured, and I'm in over my head, splashing, gasping for air. But, you know, slowly but surely, these little changes, and it's a series of little changes, and it turns everything around. You can go anywhere where there's a group. You've all heard the joke, right? It goes over like a lead balloon. But, you know, what do you call a basement full of farmers? It's a wine cellar. You can go to the gin, you can go to the coffee shop, and there's just, you know, there's a lot of negativity out there, and a lot of it is justified. You know, equipment's up, you know, threefold, fertilizers doubled, chemicals doubled. Cotton, well, it's down again today. You know, there's a lot of reasons to be discouraged, to be negative about the future of farming. But one thing I've learned with just, you know, interacting with folks like y'all, there are people out there that are still optimistic, that can see a way forward. They don't see this as the end of the line. They just see it as a way of improving, to go further, go farther than ever's been dreamed possible. I figured this was kind of fitting. This is out of the book of Isaiah, when, you know, they kind of strayed from the path they should have been on. And he lays out all the doom and gloom that's going to happen to them. But he says, if you turn around, if you do what's right, he will send you rain for the seed you sow on the ground, and the food that comes from your land will be rich and plentiful. And in that day your cattle will graze in broad meadows. So there's hope. There's hope. There was hope for them. There's hope for us. And I'm just grateful to be a part of a group like this that is willing to face the future with optimism.